Hi guys, my name is Samantha Atkinson and this is my ethical leadership presentation. In this presentation, I will be specifically focusing on the ethical leadership and issues involved in the medical field. So first and foremost, my ideal career is to become a medical doctor. I'm very passionate about medicine. I actually work in medicine, and it's something that I am very excited to pursue. I actually will be applying to med school next June, so this is something I'm very passionate about, and as a result of that, we'll be focusing my presentation today on the ethical issues involved in the medical field. So let's begin to kind of describe what a doctor is. I mean, I'm sure most of you guys know, right? You get sick, you go to the doctor, they evaluate you, give you a prescription, and you go on your way. Well, of course, there's a lot more than, to doctors than most people do know. According to Merriam-Webster, a doctor is someone who is defined as a person who is skilled in healing arts, especially one who holds a licensed degree and is licensed to practice medicine. So there are actually two different degrees that a doctor can obtain. The most common one is the MD, and the less common is the DO. While both of these are virtually interchangeable, one focuses on teaching doctors to be more specific and having a narrow range when evaluating a patient, whereas the DO is actually a more holistic approach. Both are great. And honestly, a lot of people don't even know the difference or notice the difference. In addition to that, there's also many different specialties involved. So, as many of you know, a doctor is someone who goes to school for a very long time, 4 years of undergrad, followed by 4 years of a doctorate degree, and then a residency, which is something that focuses in a specialty. I personally am very interested in dermatology, cardiology, which is the specialty focused on the heart, as well as sports medicine. While conducting research for this presentation, I found that the most beneficial leadership styles, which I'll discuss here in a minute, did find to be the transformational and the servant leadership style. So, what exactly are these leadership styles? Well, transformational is defined by our textbook in Borland, Kane, and Burton um, as something or as a leadership style that motivates followers to change or transform. So, the transformational leadership is pretty self explanatory in the fact that, it's all kind of in the name. These types of leaders very much inspire their subordinates to change, to challenge, and to grow. It consists of four dimensions, which are the idealized influence, the intellectual stimulation, inspirational motivation, and finally, the individual consideration. In this presentation, I'll be focusing specifically on the individual consideration and the intellectual stimulation, as well as the motivation aspect, because I find those to be the most beneficial um, to focus on for transformational leadership in the medical field. So, secondly, there is the servant style of leadership. And this style of leadership focuses on leaders who serve first and then lead. So, I personally find this leadership style to be very powerful, and how it's utilized, especially, which I will discuss shortly here in this presentation. According to an article I found in the Tzu Chi Medical Journal, it found that these are the strongest styles incorporated into most medical professionals. And, not only are they the strongest styles, but they are the most common and prove to be the most beneficial. So, before I go into the utilization of those styles, I'm going to briefly touch on the traits of a strong medical leader. So, the reason I want to do this is because I found a very strong connection between traits and developing and developing a leadership style. So, in this article from Gerwitz and Logan, these researchers found that these traits um, had the most beneficial results and laid the strongest foundation for creating leaders within the medical field. So these, of course, as you can see, are intelligence, drive, passion, of course, empathy for others. You have to be inspiring, and you have to also be encouraging of subordinates as well as the organization's goals. So these are obviously very important in laying that foundation. And if a leader, personally, I believe in any environment, but especially in medicine, possesses these traits, then they are already, on their way to becoming a very successful leader. So, how are these styles utilized? Well, specifically in medicine, the transformational style can be used in tons of different ways. Ones I found to be most rewarding and valuable were from this article by Cotry and Mancini, which stated that to be the most beneficial leader in medicine using the transformational style, that healthcare providers should be inspiring to both patients and staff. For example, if we want to have a concrete example, they should inspire patients to be healthy, to hang on, to have faith if they're going through a hard time. Same thing with staff, might be a long night and difficult patients who are being unethical. That leader needs to be inspiring and say, hey guys, like, we have this, like, let's remember why we do what we do. Another example would be intellectually pushing others to challenge and strive for success. So, here is where I specifically like to mention the intellectual stimulation dimension that would be utilized by a transformational style leader. You know, Especially in the medical field, people are usually very intelligent and, they want to learn more. They're hungry for knowledge. And using that intellectual stimulation as a tool to challenge and to nurture, so to speak, a subordinate is very powerful. So another example would be to, of course, respect and nurture both patients and coworkers. You have a mutual foundation of respect. You're going to have a better response to change. Subordinates are going to feel like they understand you and you understand them. And lastly, of course, acknowledging humanness, rewarding hard work. I think these are very important. Doctors are human and they make mistakes. Patients, of course, are human. We all make mistakes. And that being said, it's very important to, make subordinates and patients feel like, you're one in the same. And I think by establishing that connection, um, there can be a lot of positive outcome from that. So, next, I want to talk about the servant style leadership. And this is personally my favorite style and the one I think I identify with the strongest. Of course, any good leader, you want to develop people, you want to be authentic, and you want to provide direction. But I think the thing that makes the servant leadership style stand out, and especially how it's utilized in medicine, is by forming those strong bonds between the leader and the subordinate. Um, there's definitely a different level when it comes to the servant style leadership. Like I said in the previous slide, it's serve first, then lead. And I think the important thing about the servant style leadership and how it's utilized is that it kind of blurs that line between a subordinate and a leader. So, of course, there is going to be a leader and there's going to be a subordinate, but the servant style leadership makes establishes a bond where it's more of, I know that you're here to serve me, but I'm also here to serve you. And I think that is something that is so very powerful. I personally would like to have a leader like that. It would make me want to work harder and be more receptive because I would feel as if, we're in this together and that the respect is there mutually and that, we have that connection to strive for greatness. Um, this, of course, was discussed in Borland, Kane, and Burton in our textbook. But, I think it's also just very ingrained in medical professionals. Obviously, we go into medicine because we want to help people. And so, that being said, I also think that plays a major role in having that be the prominent leadership style in medicine and having a very positive outcome when it is utilized. So, next, I'm going to talk about some of the ethical issues faced in medicine. So, of course, there are many ethical issues, but the ones I'm going to focus on today are specifically, first and foremost, racism and sexism. So, in a case study I found by Mitchell, they presented us with this ethical problem, very common, happens all the time in medicine, unfortunately. Is it presented with a young doctor who struggles internally with providing care to a man who's shouting racial and derogatory comments toward him. So, of course, nobody wants to be yelled at. Nobody, of course, wants to be yelled at by things, and having things said that are racial and derogatory towards them. So basically, in this case study, the author presented it as this internal struggle between, the doctor and the man. And when I say that, I mean as in his internal struggle. Of course, as a doctor, he has an ethical and moral duty to help this patient and to treat him equally as any other patient. But, internally, of course, he's struggling because he's being very unethical and he doesn't want to help him. He's also struggling because not helping him would be unethical. So, what should we do? How should we solve this in this situation? Well, according to research, first and foremost, the doctor, takes an oath to help patients regardless of gender, age, sex, anything. And so, that being said, first and foremost, the doctor has to step back emotionally and detach from the situation. So, assess the patient's medical background and mental state, detach from emotions, treat the patient as you would any other. And especially here is where I'd like to point out transformational leadership comes in handy and is utilized because they are utilizing that individualized consideration. So maybe, not necessarily is it a a positive consideration, but as a doctor, you have to step back and consider him as an individual and try to understand his background and why he is the way he is, and to just, treat him as any other. That I believe is the best solution for this specific case study. And, as if the doctor can leave that room feeling good about the fact, that he has treated this patient and done so in a professional and ethical manner, then he has won and has solved this issue. So, the second issue I want to discuss in this presentation is uncooperative patients and how to treat them. So, this kind of falls under the unethical patients, right? So in this case study from Budinger, Mary, and Mary, a patient presents to the ER with no intention of wanting care. He's very sick, and as the nursing staff and doctors evaluate him, they find that he has no immediate family to contact and no permanent residence. The patient refuses care, and the doctors can only treat him once his condition becomes critical. So, while this might not seem like the biggest issue, it actually is like a ripple effect because not only is the patient suffering, but he is taking away, time and energy from patients who, are also just as sick or who actually want help. And, the doctors and the staff are going to have to pour into him and take care of him when if he wanted help and wanted to do preventative care, he could probably already be on his way home. But in this specific case study, the patient was refusing care, and so what would happen is he would just get sicker and sicker until he would get critical, and then the doctors would revive him, and they would recommend, hey, I think you should have this procedure done. And he would refuse, and then he'd get critical again. And then they could only revive him when he was unable to make decisions on his own. So, unfortunately, it was unethical because and unfair to other patients who, he's taking away from, and also to himself because he's suffering. So, what is the solution to treat this problem? So, From the research I found, it's of course treat patient to the best of the healthcare provider's abilities, work as hard as possible from letting this affect overall patient care. And especially here, I believe, utilizing that servant style leadership. So, here you really are serving the patient. Patient is the number one priority. Even though he's making it difficult um, to solve this problem, the patient just, or the provider just needs to take care of them as the best that they can, and put more of that leadership aside and just serve them. That's all they can really do in this situation. So, lastly, I would just like to conclude with some scripture. While I was looking, kind of evaluating everything I've learned over the course, I thought this really struck home, especially with the medical field and the doctor's leadership style. And that's from Timothy chapter 2, verse 24. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach patiently, enduring evil. So, not that necessarily, unethical equals evil, but this kind of struck home with me because, we are the Lord's servants, but we're also serving others. And the leadership style here is to, patients are going to tell you you're wrong and they're going to want to argue with you, and you can't argue back. And you're going to have to be kind when you don't want to be. And you're going to have to be able to teach in hopes that people will listen and in hopes that they'll understand. And you'll have to endure that unethical um, actions that do sometimes happen in medicine. You know, as I stated here, they are inevitable, but I think that my recommendation, and from the research I found, is that, to just continue to educate medical professionals on how to handle unethical situations and how to approach those situations to provide the best care. At the end of the day, we just want to provide the best care for our patients. And to do that, I think the most beneficial recommendations are just to educate new professionals in medicine and say, hey, you're going to be faced with racism, you're going to be faced with sexism, and you're going to be faced with uncooperative patients in times where you're not going to know what to do, and you're going to have internal battles with yourself to try to do what's best. And so I think, like I said here, all we can do is just educate and try to, do the best we can to implement our leadership styles for a positive outcome and just to provide the best patient care. I really enjoyed the semester. This class was great. I learned so much, and I really hope you guys enjoyed my presentation. Please see, here are my references, and thanks for a great class.